S. Michelle Ross, the Intentional Lifestyle Coach. So I want to welcome everyone as people start to come in. Um, so tonight is going to be a little different. Um, Tonight is going to be a little different. Tonight, I want to actually talk about my book. So, and I'm going to talk about one chapter in the book. I really want to talk about the 7 steps of change. So that's what I decided. So tonight is going to be a little shorter. We're not going to be here for an hour. So tonight is going to be about 30 minutes, which was my original plan, but I have never actually made it under an hour. So tonight I'm going to try to do that. And tonight I'm just going to talk just briefly about my book. So I want everybody to definitely grab a copy of The Intentional Life. So my book is called The Intentional Life: Connecting Dots of Pattern for Clarity by S. Michelle Ross. That is me. So what I want to do is I just want to talk briefly about the intentional life, the 7 steps to change. So God gave me this a very long time ago, and um, and like I don't know if I actually said it, but it took me about 10 years to write this book because I was being disobedient. I didn't think I could. I had all of these things in my head about, you know, what I thought I could and could not do. But the Word of God says I can do all things through Christ, which strengthens me. And so ultimately, I wind up doing it, and I think it's pretty great. I allowed God to write this book out of me, and it turned out amazing. It's amazing what you can do when you begin to trust God and not lean on your own understanding and not lean on the things that you think from your past. So anytime that you are able to, you allow yourself to trust what God's put in you, to allow yourself to be led by the Holy Spirit, you will be totally amazed and just astonished at what God can produce out of you. I'm a living testimony. So we're going to talk about the intentional life. So the intentional life, you can purchase the intentional life anywhere where books are sold. Walmart, you can get it from Amazon, you can get it from Barnes and Noble. Anywhere books are sold, you can get The Intentional Life: Connecting Dots of Pattern for Clarity by me, S. Michelle Ross. All right. So, what I want to talk about is in my book, it's chapter 8. And it is, so let me just tell you a little bit about this book. So, a little bit about The Intentional Life. So, The Intentional Life was written, number one, because God wanted me to write this, not because I wanted to write this book. I had no desire to do this, and that's one of the reasons it took me so long. So, this book really brings together the our behavior and our consequences. It really brings that union together so that you can begin to see that. Because a lot of the time, what I realized was that most people, we don't recognize our behavior. So we don't even recognize our behavior patterns because we have eyes that look out. I'm more aware of my neighbors' behavior patterns than my very own. And so, and I'm not unique. We all are like this. We all have eyes that look out. And so, what happens is we begin to notice others' behaviors and we don't identify our own. So, the connection between our behavior and our consequences, sometimes we can't see it. So, most of the times we don't even see it. We don't even see that this consequence is happening because of that behavior. And so that's one of the things that's discussed in this book of how to begin to see it. The first three chapters are, I talk about, you know, the injury, how we become scarred, because what happens is, we suffer injury, we suffer trauma, and then that trauma builds defense mechanism. It builds filters, is what I call it in my book. It builds these filters. And so what happens is once that filter is built, then it becomes, so it's like it's a filter or it's a wall. Sometimes you'll hear it called a wall. Sometimes you'll hear it called, so filters, walls, or anything like that. That's what happens. So defense mechanisms. So what happens is when we're injured, we develop these defense mechanisms so that that injury does not happen again. But what actually winds up happening is that defense mechanism teaches us how to behave. So it builds a wall. And so what we know is that when you build a wall, a safe place for us, so when we build that wall, no one can get in behind that wall and no one can get out of that wall. And so we, that injured person, at whatever age we are when we become injured, is trapped behind that wall. So when we're trapped behind that wall, that safety mechanism, that wall or that defense mechanism or that filter now is it's now the thing that judges everything that comes to us. So now we have this filter. Okay, so let's say that someone yelled at you as a child. So that person yelling at you, now as a result of that, you're very shy. You don't like people yelling at you. And so that filter, that wall is now being built to protect that little girl who did not like being yelled at. So now that filter becomes a defense mechanism, the protection, so that anytime anybody yells at you, that is now something set in stone that used to protect. And so what happens is that defense mechanism now stands up anytime somebody yells. It stands up. It is the first defense. And so as we go through our life with that defense mechanism, we lose sight of why that is. But what we keep in our hindsight is we begin to fortify this wall. So we strengthen this wall by anytime someone yells at us, we attribute that to I'm not safe, or however you attribute it into your mind is I'm not safe. Nobody gets to yell at me. And so what we do is anytime somebody yells at us or anytime we're triggered by this wall, anything that hits this wall, that wall is fortified. So that wall now becomes more fortified to protect us from injury again. And so what happens is that wall, we begin to fortify it because that's our protection. And see, and that's a trick of the enemy, because God does not want us to defend ourselves. What God says is, vengeance is mine, I shall repay. He tells us to cast that onto him because he cares for us. Hi. And so that's a trick of the enemy. So when we're injured, that becomes a part of who we are, that defense mechanism. And so it's always defending us. So what we will do is we will either yell back at somebody or we will revert inside of ourselves and become very shy. And, whatever the result of that thing is, that's now something that we hold dear. That's something that we learn to rely on instead of the word of God. So we will learn to rely on the protection of that defense mechanism, that filter or that wall. We look at that as that's our protection instead of God being our protection. So you can read about this in The Intentional Life. So, and I go into detail about how that works and how all of that happens. And so, but tonight what I want to talk about is the 7 steps of change. So anytime we want to change anything, there are 7 steps that we go through. And I'm going to list them very quickly and then talk about them pretty briefly. So the 7 steps are acknowledgement. Anything you cannot change something that you don't acknowledge or something that you're in agreement with. So the first step is acknowledgement. The second step is illumination, and illumination is pretty much just turning on a light. And then the third step is clarity. So once you turn on a light, you can see pretty clear. If you walk into a dark room and there's no light, you can't see. So the third step is clarity. The step number 4 is intervention. So anytime that you want to change something, you first acknowledge this is a problem. This is something that needs to be changed. You turn on the light. You can see clearly that this, what it is. You turn on the light and then you have clarity, and then you have intervention. This is the thing that you want to disrupt the pattern. Just like when we turn on the light, light disrupts darkness. So that's step number 4. Step number 5 is practice. This is something that's new to you. So this is not something like the habit, which is automatic. This is something that we want to disrupt that habit with. So now we've got to practice. You've got to practice it. Step number 6 is relapse. So relapse is a part of change, because if when you've never done something before, or when it's been a habit for so long, if you're not intentional, it's the name of the book, The Intentional Life. If you're not intentional, that habit is already automatic. So it will just go ahead and play its way out. And then, so that's number 6. And number 7 is change. All right, so let's talk about them a little bit more. So step 1 is acknowledgement. Anything you don't acknowledge, it doesn't exist to you. And so what I mean by that is it's not that it doesn't exist, it just doesn't exist to you. Now, I may see it. Remember, I started this segment talking about, we have eyes that see out. So my habits, my behavior, I won't see them because I'm so busy doing them. But other people who are around me consistently, they will see it. And just like I will see the habits of those who I'm consistently around, I will be able to say, no, when somebody confronts you, you automatically get defensive and these lines come on your head. Now, if I'm paying attention, I may actually notice, I may not, I'm seeing it right now, so I'm noticing it. I may not notice because I'm not always looking at myself, but because I'm looking in this camera, I can see when my face scrunches up. But a lot of the times when we're doing the behavior, we don't actually see it. So I may not see my face, what my face looks like when somebody confronts me. So that's the first thing. Anything we don't acknowledge, it doesn't exist to us. It doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It just doesn't exist to us because we're not being intentional to actually look at it and to actually see it. So, and I'll give an example of that would be just like if I say that, my face, what my face looks like when somebody I don't know, I may do. I don't see what that face looks like, but somebody looking at me, they can describe and they say, yes, Michelle, that's what you do every single time. Somebody who you don't know, they say hi, because I'm not looking at my face. I may say, no, that's not true. I don't do that. But everybody who sees me is just like, yes, you do, Michelle. Yes, you do. Because I have eyes that look out. So I'm not looking at my face all the time. So I may not actually see it. So that's the first thing. The first thing is we must acknowledge the behavior. You have to acknowledge something to change it. You cannot change anything that you don't acknowledge, nor can you change anything that you refuse to let go of. All right, so the first step is acknowledgement. Anything, you cannot change something you don't acknowledge. Number two is illumination. So we have to turn on a light. We have to begin to see it. So if the behavior that I want to change is, let's go with lying. So first I have to acknowledge that I lie. And so, how do I turn the light on that? So, turning the light on, which is step two, that's illumination, is accepting what somebody else may say about, yeah, you stretch the story just a little bit, or you blatant outright lie. So that's going to be something that I have to acknowledge within myself that yes, I'm not telling the truth. I have to acknowledge, yes, I add on things, I stretch the truth a bit. I have to own and take responsibility that I'm not always truthful. That, if the story is that somebody went to the mailbox and took the mail out of my box, and then what I tell someone is they took the mail out of my box and slammed it down and kicked it, and that's adding on to the story. And so that's not truthful. So I have to recognize that I'm not telling the truth. So that's step two. So the first step is acknowledgement. I have to acknowledge that that I don't always tell the truth, and I need to tell the truth. Step two is turning the light on, is actually being intentional, actually looking at how I tell stories to see if I am embellishing the story. Am I telling exactly that truth is? So that's number two, turning the light on, actually hearing from other people, looking at it myself, whatever that looks like, but turning the light on. Then number three is clarity. So now that I've heard what other people said, I've actually looked at myself and I've owned my responsibility that I do stretch the truth. I do add on, I actually embellish. Now I have clarity. So now I have clarity of what needs to be changed. So now step number four is intervention. So now that I know what needs to change, I can now add something in here of what needs to be changed, because now I can put an intervention in to tell the truth. So now I can put, my intervention can be to have someone have someone actually who knows the truth to step in if I actually tell a lie, or to actually speak out of my mouth only the details of the truth, or I could say, and all of these things can be intervention, the intervention, and you can try different things because one intervention may not work, so the first intervention that I may choose is to, whenever I feel like I want to embellish or lie, I can say, that's a lie. So that would be the first intervention. So anytime I'm telling a story, if I'm thinking, if I'm feeling like I want to embellish it because it's kind of boring, I want to add to it by saying, my sister came to my house and she left early. She left without making up the bed. Let's go that. And so, and I tell the story as my sister came to my house and she didn't even make up the bed. She left the house. She left the whole room a mess. But the only thing she did was not make up the bed. So by, when I'm telling the story, my sister left my house and did not make up the bed. And she left all kinds of junk around in that bedroom. She didn't fold up the blanket, doing stuff like that. So the intervention would be like, when I'm telling that story, just like as soon as I say anything other than she didn't make up the bed, is saying that's a lie. That's a lie. My sister, all she did, she left the room in in just the way it should be. She just didn't make up the bed. That would be how I would use the intervention of saying that's a lie. All right. So step number 4, that was intervention. Step number 5 would be to practice. So that would be exactly what I just did, is practicing it. So practicing. So anytime I'm telling a story, I would have to practice saying my intervention, which my intervention is to say that's a lie. So if I'm saying my name is Shannon Michelle Ross, that's a lie. So that would be a lie because my name is Stephanie Michelle Ross. That's what the S stands for. So just putting it out, practicing it. Another way of practicing would be just like if I going traveling. You know, if you're going to a new place and you don't know where that place is, using the GPS. So every time you need to get home or get to the place that you don't know where it is, it would be using the GPS. And so that would look like, that's what the practice would look like. Actually practicing implementing that the intervention. So whatever that intervention is would be to practice that. So again, we've got the first thing is acknowledgement. We've got to acknowledge that this thing needs to change. Then we have to shine light on it. That's illumination, to shine light on that thing. Then step number 3 is now you have clarity. Now you shine the light on it. Now you have clarity. Step number 4 is the intervention. Once you've shined the light on it and you can see clearly, now you can see this is what I need to, now I see what the intervention needs to be. And once you have that intervention, then step number 5 is you need to practice. And so once you begin to practice the intervention, then step number 6 is relapse. Okay, so let's talk about relapse. So relapse is a part of change simply because anytime that you're not being intentional, that habit that you're trying to change, it is automatic. So that habit is something that you don't even have to think about. It is automatic. You know, so just like I'll give an example of when we bought this house. And the house we used to live in, that house is not far from here. So one day I was driving home and I was on the phone. I was distracted talking on the phone to my mom. And so I did not turn on the GPS because I'm thinking, I know how to get home. But that was not true. So I wound up just driving. And because the neighborhood, it's just right over, just a little short ways from where my new house is. So I was on the phone, so I'm going the same way. And before I know it, I wound up in front of my old house. And because I was not being intentional and put my GPS on, and I was on the phone, everything looked like I was headed to my new house, but I went to my old house because that was automatic. I knew all of that, how to get to the house. And so I did not use the intervention. My intervention was to put my GPS on. So had I put my intervention on and put my intervention, which was my GPS, put that on and practiced, which was, put the GPS on, I would have made it to the new house. But because I did not put the intervention, which was put on my GPS, practice it, I wound up in front of my old house. And so, and that happens, relapse is a part of the process because there are going to be times when you are distracted. There's going to be times when you're, just depending on what it is, the distraction can be hunger. It can be aggravation. It can be not, being distracted by any number of things. And so anytime that we're distracted, you're not being intentional. To be intentional, you have to actually be thinking about where I'm going, actually making sure the intervention is being used, making sure that I am practicing. So to be intentional does not happen accidentally. So to be intentional means you are actually actively participating in whatever this thing is that you're doing. And then the final step is change. So that would be this step 7 would be the actual change. So let's go through them again. So the first step is acknowledgement. So anything you don't acknowledge, it doesn't exist to you. You cannot change something that you don't acknowledge. So if I don't acknowledge that I'm always wearing the color green, I can't change it. So I'm always wearing the color green. See my green earrings? So if that's something that I want to, that I don't acknowledge that I wear green. I don't always wear green. So if I don't acknowledge it, I can't change it because it doesn't exist to me. So anything we don't acknowledge, it doesn't exist to us. It doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It just doesn't exist to me. So if I say that I don't need to change wearing green because I don't wear green all the time. But everybody else around me is just like, Michelle, you have on green every single day. Every single day. But if I don't acknowledge it and I'm the only one who can change it, it doesn't exist to me. And therefore it cannot change. So that's the first thing, acknowledgement. We must acknowledge the thing that we want to change. Number 2 is to turn the light on. That is the illumination phase. So we have to turn the light on so that we can see it clearly. So if the thing that I want to change is that I always wear green, I have to first acknowledge that I do wear green. And then I turn the light on and I can look at pictures. I can hear from people to say, yes, Michelle, you always have on green. Somewhere you have on green, whether it's a green earring, it's green clothing, a green shirt, you have on green shoes, you have on green pants, you have on green somewhere. Even if the green is in my nails, see, I have green there. And I love all shades of green. So I will always have on a shade of green somewhere. So even if it's in my glasses, I don't have my green glasses here, and I've got several pair of glasses that have green in them. So that would be the thing. I would have to, number 1, acknowledge that I wear green and then turn the light on. And turning the light on is talking to others, looking at pictures, looking at myself, actually admitting that I have on green. And then the third thing is clarity. So once you acknowledge it, you turn the light on, now you have clarity. So I have clarity. Yes, I wear green. I make sure I have green on somewhere. So that's step 3 is clarity. Now that I have clarity that I need to change all this green that I'm wearing, so then is the intervention. So the intervention I would choose would be to wear any color other than green. That would be my intervention. So once I decide on my intervention, step number 5 is to practice. So practice would be wearing any other color other than the color green. And so I would practice that, and my practice would have to be intentional, because when I get dressed, I would have to intentionally put on a color that is not green. That would be what my practice looked like. And then number 6 would be relapse. Relapse is simply a part of the process. So on a day that I'm not paying attention to what I'm wearing because I have so much green, 9 times out of 10, I'm going to have on something green. So unless I'm intentionally focusing on, Michelle, you're not wearing green today, 9 times out of 10, I'm going to have on green because I have green shoes, I have green earrings, I have green tops, I have green bottoms, I have green everything. So I would have to be intentional to not wear green. And that's not going to happen. And then the last step would be step 7 would be change. So that's how it works. So we have to, number 1, acknowledge what needs to be changed, illuminate, turn the light on the thing that needs to be changed. Then you have clarity of the thing that needs to be changed. And then you can choose, once you know what needs to be changed, then you can wisely choose your intervention. Once you have chosen your intervention, the next step is you need to intentionally practice implementing that intervention. And then number 6 is relapse. If you're not being intentional, you fall back into that habit. And then number 7 is change. We are at 30 minutes. Oh my goodness. The first time I've been able to stay at 30 minutes. So I'm going to go ahead and end tonight. I want to remind you all Go out and get The Intentional Life, Connecting Dots of Pattern for Clarity. This book, you can purchase this book anywhere books are sold. You can get them on Amazon. You can get it at Barnes and Noble. You can get it at Walmart. You can email me at smichelleross@hotmail.com, and you can cash out me, and I will send you a signed copy. So go out and get your copy of The Intentional Life, Connecting Dots of Pattern for Clarity. And I'll see you guys next week, next Wednesday. So The Intentional Life, I'm on every week, every Wednesday at 6 o'clock. And I'm going to be talking about something about the Word of God. And again, my book is filled with the Word of God. So I look forward to seeing you guys next Wednesday at 6 o'clock, right here, same place at The Intentional Life. Hit the like button, hit the share button. Please subscribe, and I will see you guys. Hit that notification bell so that you know when I upload a new video. I will see you guys next Wednesday at 6 p.m. See you then. Love you guys. Later.